I write for young children. I write for babies age 3 to 5, as old as 8 years old. And I grew up in the Caribbean under British rule. So I have to tell you, when I first came to Canada, what you do in schools surprised me. Because when we go to school in the Caribbean at age 4 and 5, we go to learn. And when I got here and I had children, my 4 and 5 and 6-year-old they were playing in the sandbox. And I begged for more knowledge. And no, we let them do their own thing. We let them evolve, whatever. And I'm going, no, their brain is ready to absorb whatever you give them. So in 2015, spring of 2015, we got invited by the Vimy Foundation to listen to them talk about what they're doing, because 2017, the 100th anniversary was coming up. So I'm sitting in the audience, and I have a friend who was at the same presentation here with me. And the president of the Vimy Foundation is standing up there and telling us that, you know, they're looking for funding, and the 100th anniversary is coming up. And then he says, but you know, we're not going to teach the children what has happened in 1917. The 100th anniversary is coming up, but the young students won't learn about this. And being a children's writer, I zoned the gentleman out of my system, and into my brain I'm going, okay, like a grandpa needs to tell this story to a grandson. I knew all about Vimy Ridge, so he needs to know, because he's only doing this. And I based it loosely on my own husband and my grandson, because my grandson is with this handheld. And before our meeting and our dinner was over, I had the story. And I said to my husband, okay, I won't get a publisher to pick it up, because we're spring of 2015. Publishers are 5 years out. So it'll be 2019 before a publisher can publish it. That doesn't help the 100th anniversary. So I need to go to Vimy. I need to tour. I need to learn everything I can learn. I need to read as much as I can. So I don't frighten the children, but I give them the general story. So I started the quest that September. We went to Vimy, and we have a couple of posters that Major Randall will talk to you about after. When I got to the cemetery, I was appalled, because these are young Canadians who they thought they were out for a good time, have a lark, let's go over to Europe, shoot some guns, kill some guys, and come home for Christmas. Well, needless to say, the battle to take Vimy Ridge lasted probably a total of 4 years. And a lot of people died. And going down into the tunnels and being in the trenches, I mean, I was constantly crying. And I said to my husband, I need to write this story so that young people understand what was sacrificed back then. Because they don't know. They really don't understand. And when I came home from that dinner, I phoned my daughter, who is a grade 6 teacher, and I said, did you learn about Vimy Ridge? And she said, only in grade 12. And I said, what do you mean only in grade 12? And she said, I elected to take Canadian history. And that's when I got the knowledge of Vimy Ridge. If she had not elected to take history, she would not have learned about Vimy Ridge. So I sat down and I wrote the book, and I have to tell you, I talked about it incessantly, what I was doing, and I'm at my optometrist, and I'd like to introduce him right now. Stand up. This is John Twidell. I'm sitting in his chair, and he's a really good guy. He always says, "What are you writing? What are you reading?" And I said, "Oh, I'm working on a book for children about Vimy Ridge because the 100th anniversary is coming up." He says, "Oh, my grandpa was at Vimy Ridge. He was one of the first guys to go over the trenches." And I'm like, how can I learn? Because I thought, oh, it'll be great to have a local person into this story. So Grandpa maybe have been in World War I, but he was really good. He did a YouTube video, and I listened to the YouTube video, and he talks about all what happened and how he was injured, and I incorporated that. So thank you very much for giving me Grandpa's story so that I could use it in this book. I published 6,000 copies. And thank you to the Canadian, the BC and Yukon Legion down in Vancouver. I gave them 4,000 copies, and they gave 2 copies to every school library in British Columbia and the Yukon. So every private, public, and First Nations school got 2 copies of this book. I included a letter, and I said to the principal or the librarian, if you'd like extra copies, please let me know. I got some donations, and I started to mail books out. If a school says, our class would like to study the Vimy project, and I sent 50 books, so I sent 70 books, so I sent 100 books. Just one school in Ontario heard about it and asked me, and I sent 100 books to them, but mostly British Columbia. I sent an e-copy book to the Vimy Foundation to put up on their website in case a grandparent or a parent would like to download the story to read to their grandchild. And does everybody know what happened at Vimy Ridge? Hands? Everybody knows? Okay. War started, and the Allies decided they had to get into the war. So with the Allies getting in, every Commonwealth country, that's how Canada got involved, India got involved, Africa got involved, and it was all because of Great Britain. They were all associated. So Australia, everybody went. Now, the Germans, I just did a cruise, a river cruise from Amsterdam to Budapest. And Franz Joseph, the Emperor of Austria, was very upset at the Serbs. You know, wars start by the stupidest reasons. This gentleman is upset at the Serbs because they want to control them again. So someone assassinates the Archduke. So it's all in the book. I'm giving all the kids this information. And the grandpa tells the grandson, it's one problem, catapult into another problem, catapult. And pretty soon you have World War I. The funny thing about it is that the Germans really wanted to get into the battle. So the moment that Austria asked for help, the Germans were in. And they were very quickly off and running. And they really wanted to get to Paris. So they so quickly went through Belgium and were into France, and they were at Vimy. Now, when I say Vimy Ridge, it's not really a hill, it's just a slight incline. You will know you're walking upwards as you go towards the Canadian Memorial, but it's a little ridge, but it's so strategic. You could see everything. So the Germans entrenched themselves there, and there they stayed until the Canadians routed them. So the French tried, and they don't know the exact number, but like France lost like 130,000 in that attack, right? And that was in 14. In 15, the Canadians arrived at Christmas. In 16, the Germans put up signs, "Welcome Canadians," across the battlefield. And they basically said that the Canadians will go home in a rowboat, what's left of them. That was how they were predicting they would mow down the Canadians. The Canadians trained together. They never allowed the Allies to separate them. And they did a lot of night raids. They lost a lot of guys in the night raids. The Germans used chemical. They used gas. The Canadians had to pee in their handkerchiefs and cover their faces to, survive, but most of them died in a couple of the raids. And then on Easter Monday, April 9th, they were ready. They knew what they were supposed to do. When I did the research, I came across the expression rolling barrage. I couldn't wrap my head around what a rolling barrage was. So someone from Vimy had to physically explain to me the big guns at the back of the line. They have a certain point that they're going to barrage. They're going to bombard it. Now, as they recalibrate to move up to do the next barrage, the Canadians have to run from their trenches to the first spot and hunker down, take the Germans, kill whoever is left, and hunker down for the second barrage. So to wrap my head around how this is going now, we lose a lot of guys in the first barrage because they've been crouched down all night. It's 6 o'clock in the morning, snow on the ground, and they're so excited. Before the barrage is finished, they're over the top and they're running. So a lot of them get killed. On the monument, if you ever go to Vimy, this is the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. There are names of the guys we lost because there was no grave to give them a burial. So they've put their names at the bottom of the memorial. And there is 30,000?
No, 11,285 names on the memorial.
Thank you. 11,000, they did not find their bodies. Okay, so their names are on there. Now, Paul is going to give you a little test. You'll go to these posters and there's a little test because this is what we do with the young school children when we go into schools. So I wrote this book, I put it out there. I am very happy to say that most of the teachers are writing back to say the kids are so excited. When growing up in the British system, no matter if you had a paragraph, the British would give you 5 questions for comprehension. So at the back of the book, there are 31 questions. Some of them are straightforward, but my editor is sitting over there, Norma, said, let's get them some critical thinking. Let them think. So some of the questions to the young students are, do you think war is a good thing? Why? Do you think war is a bad thing? Why? So get them to think for themselves. There are a lot of archival photos and some of the photos at the back. I went to the Canadian archives And I bought photos so the students could see what it was like and what the big guns were like. And this is a photo from the archives, and this is the respite. This is the Canadians going for a respite after winning Vimy Ridge. So I thought that was the appropriate photo to put on there because these guys survived. So before I introduce Paul and pass all this equipment that I feel like I'm in Star Wars, anybody has any questions about what I did and why I did it, or? Come on. Yes, sir.
Were those all Canadian forces that were battling there with the Germans?
No, there was Allied, there was British, there was Canadians, there was Australians, but the battle that morning was the Canadians' turn. It was 4 battalions of Canadians that attacked. Took them the whole day, but by the end of the first 2 or 3 or 4 barrages, like the 1st battalion had gotten to where they were supposed to go and stay. And then the 2nd battalion, the 4th battalion took the longest because they had done a night raid previously, and they had lost a lot of their soldiers. So, yes?
How many names in that monument? Would there be?
It starts at A and it goes all the way to Z, and there's 11,285.
But total, the total monument.
No,
Oh.
those are the Canadian
Yes,
names that they never found their bodies.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes.
Guys who have died ended up being buried. And that was a sad thing for me going to some of the cemeteries because
Unknown soldiers.
no, they have names and they have where they're from, but they're buried over there, right? A relative now can't just run up to the cemetery on Veterans Day or whatever to put they're over there, okay? So it's kind of sad. When you go down the cemetery and you read, because my last name is Thorpe, so we were running around all the different cemeteries looking for how many Thorpes, because we don't know if they're distantly related to us. But I mean, the names and the ages of the young people, I have a 14-year-old grandson. He's not going to sign up to go anywhere. So when you think back 100 years ago about these young people probably just coming out of high school or in the middle of high school or just finished secondary school, and they're signing up. So okay, so I really want a big thank you to the museum, and thanks to the Canadian Legion, the BC Yukon Command, who helped me get this out there. And I will unmic myself and we will mic Paul and we will continue and you can ask your questions. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to talk very briefly about the battle because on the 11th of April here in the evening, Captain Howard Hisdall will be doing a talk about the battle in great detail, so I'm just going to gloss over that all. Okay. So I'm just going to give a quick orientation. This is where Vimy, up in the top in the little box of blue there. So you got the English Channel, and then there's Vimy there. Vimy was part of the Battle of Arras. So it's quite possible that the Newfoundland Regiment could have been on the flanks, but they weren't straight at Vimy Ridge itself. Vimy was strictly mostly Canadian with a couple of British brigades attached to them. So this is the area of Vimy Ridge. So next. Now one of the things that if you go to the actual site is you go to the parking lot and there's the memorial in front of you, similar to the picture you see there to your left. There's this monument to the French division, the Moroccan division. And basically, they started back here in May of 1915. They advanced 4 kilometers to the very ridge. And in fact, they made it to the ridge, despite all the historians saying the French failed to take the ridge. They did take the ridge. They just couldn't hold it. So there's a slight difference there. But they got Canada within jumping off spot. And then in September of 15, they brought the line here. And basically, this is where the British came in, reinforced the ridges, and the trenches started digging tunnels towards the German lines. And then they made no major attack. There's always little raids, night raids, and so on, but Britain did not attack at Vimy Ridge, despite what Canadian historians will tell you. And then the Canadians relieved them, and then Canadians took over from there. So it was, the French got them to within jumping off, the British prepared the positions, and then the Canadians came in and continued with that work, as well as doing the different raids. Okay, next. Okay, the commander was Lieutenant General Julian Byng, who was a British officer, and Major General Currie was the 1st Divisional Commander. So he was in charge of the 1st Division. There were 3 other divisions as part of the makeup. Okay, next. Okay, one of the things, and Yasmin mentioned it, was training. The soldiers trained together down to the platoon level, which was unheard of at that time. Currie was sent by Byng to go study what the French were doing, and he reorganized the platoon when he came back. So now the platoon consisted of a grenade section, a machine gun section, and a rifle section. And those 3 units trained together so that if they were pinned down, the machine gunners would cover fire, the grenadiers would throw their grenades, and then the riflemen would charge in afterwards. And they all trained. This is a mock-up of the trenches in the rear area, and this is where every single platoon came and trained so that they knew it in their sleep what they had to do, right down to the platoon level, which is one of the reasons why Canada was successful. Next. Okay, this is the general layout. So we had the 1st Division here, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Division. This was the start line, which is basically where the French had brought them up to. There were 3 subsequent lines, the black line, the red line, and the blue line. They were given specific details of when they were to capture these lines. And as you can see all the different numbers here of the different regiments. Right in here is the 2nd Canadian Mounted Rifles. They are our local regiment from the Okanagan that was formed from 30 BC Horse that were in Vernon and Kelowna. They formed that initial cell of that. But all the other regiments are represented right across the country here. One of the key things that basically helped win was the Rolling Barrage and artillery. Majority of the artillery was British artillery. So Vimy wasn't just a Canadian victory. There was a lot of support from the British, which tends to be forgotten by Canadian historians. Okay, at the thing, throughout the entire First World War, 73 Canadians were awarded with the Victoria Cross. That's the highest award for valor that any individual can obtain. And these are the 4 winners who earned the Victoria Cross during the battle for Vimy Ridge.
Did they survive?
At least 2 I know of were killed and received the award afterwards, and 1 was awarded it, didn't actually receive it, but was killed in subsequent battles. Okay, so these are the, okay, next, yeah. The Penticton fallen that fought at the Battle of Vimy Ridge and died on that day. In this case here, 9th of April, day of the battle, age 21. Next one is a sergeant. I don't have a picture yet, and I'll explain why in a minute. And I didn't get to all the cemeteries in France and Belgium. I got my selected ones, and I tried to collect as many local people as I could as I toured through the various cemeteries. Next. So this is, again, you've seen the picture on the front of Yasmin's book. Next. This is a colorized version that the Vimy Foundation has done, and they're in the process of trying to colorize all of the, shall we say, key pictures that were representing Vimy Ridge. So I thought it'd be nice to show what the Vimy Foundation is up to and what they're doing. And I think you agree that's a very nice picture now colorized. Okay. So Vimy Ridge, though successful from the Canadian point, because we actually obtained the ridge within by the 12th, from the big scheme of things, the rest of the Battle of Arras was a flop. Nothing went anywhere. Canada now had the ridge, which now dominated into the German lines, but that's about it. From the German perspective, Vimy Ridge is just a blip in the road, just a bump. All they did was, we withdrew back a few thousand meters, big deal. They'd gone back into one of the reserve trenches and then dug in. So from that perspective, Vimy's important because it was the first time the 4 divisions fought together using a new technique. At Vimy, they proved the Rolling Barrage, the fact that the guys are trained down to the platoon level, in cooperation with artillery, were able to take their objectives, and quite successfully. That's where Vimy really falls into the big scheme of things. Next. So, Curry is promoted up to Lieutenant General. He is now in charge of the Canadian Corps. He still has some British elements attached to him. And his first battle is Hill 70. And it's just up from, when you stand on the memorial and you look towards the German lines, you can see where Lens is. He originally was told to take the town of Lens. Curry was a type, 1, he listened to his subordinates, and 2, he did his own reconnaissance. So he went out and checked everything and realized that if I take the city, it's going to cost a lot of Canadian lives, more than necessary. But he noticed that this hill, which dominated the area, was relatively undefended, and if he takes that, it will force the Germans to counterattack at great loss. And that's exactly what he did. He had to go over his boss's head to get permission to do that. So now you can see where the Canadians are starting to think and not just go out over the top in a blind rush that was happening before. They're trained, they've got coordination, and they're starting to think about strategic, grabbing key terrain that will force the enemy to attack at great loss to them and not to us. Next. Next time the Canadian Corps is involved is the Second Battle of Passchendaele. The British were trying to take it, they failed, and so here's a battle where, yes, the British failed, Canada comes in and takes the ridge for them at Passchendaele. And then they withdraw and then the British carry on. Next battle. Battle of Amiens. Okay, next battle. In this case here, the Germans are now expecting that if the Canadians are opposite them in the line, there's going to be an attack. They saw it happen at Vimy, they saw it happen at Passchendaele. Wherever the Canadians are, there's going to be an attack. So what they did at this one, the Australians were holding the line. And instead of relieving them and having the Canadians go in, the Australians stayed in place, and the Canadians came in, infiltrate through, and then attacked before the Germans knew that the Canadians were in the line. 8th of August, 1918 is considered the Black Day for the German Army. This is from their top supreme commander, this was the first time that the German Army received a very bad battle. It did not go well for them. And they realized that this was the end. And that was thanks to the Canadian Corps. Next. Then the Battle of Canal du Nord. This is probably Canada's best and should be our most famous battle. Not Vimy Ridge. Vimy is important for its thing. But the Canal du Nord was a brilliant attack by Curry. He noticed that a portion of the canal was not well prepared yet. And so he had to go all the way to Hague and get permission because all his subordinate commanders above him were saying no, no, no. What he wanted to do was, we're talking here about 3-4 kilometers. He was going to take his entire corps and push it through those 4 kilometers and then fan out. Basically, what are blitzkrieg type tactics now that people ever use. Punch through the weak spot and then push out. And yet Haig was finally had faith in what Curry and the Corps could do, and he gave permission for them to do that. And that's exactly what he did, and pushed the Germans through. And they gathered the Corps, or got the canal, and then carried on. Cavalry charges happened shortly after that. And the next battle for Cambrai, same sort of thing, using tanks, and the tactics they used continued to push the Germans back towards Germany. And last slide. So the Canadian Corps played a leading role in attaining the Allied victory. And so we as Canadians should be proud of the effort that the Corps made during this particular war. Next. And we, besides that, in the next slide, this is how many people served in the CEF, Canadian Expeditionary Forces. Next. How many made it overseas? How many were killed? And because of the sacrifice that Canada made and the contribution to the victory, Canada was granted a seat at the treaty signing, and also on its own accord agreed to join the League of Nations. Canada was now starting to become its own nation. Before that, they were involved with the First World War because of Britain. At that time we were dominions. Our foreign policy was dictated by Britain. So whatever Britain did, we and the rest of what's now the Commonwealth had no choice in the matter. We had to go along with them. They would come to us and ask us for, well, we need a certain army. And then each of the various Commonwealth countries contributed accordingly. Next slide. So because of that, there's a lot of sort of sentiment about creating some sort of monuments to honor the sacrifice that the Canadian soldiers did. Next. There were 160 submissions, and they finally chose one main monument, which is what Vimy is, and then 7 smaller ones spread at key various battlefields throughout Belgium and at these locations here. And as you can see, there is this one here. That's one of the secondary ones that was chosen. And of course, there's Vimy image, the draft version right there. And the other ones, the other smaller, are just a big block with the names of either so this one is at St. Julian's, which was the first gas attack in 16. And then the Passchendaele and the other ones just have this big block that has the various names and the battles and facing in the appropriate directions. Next. So Walter Allward was the one who came up with the idea for Vimy Ridge and the design for that. He was the architect. And this is why he did it. Apparently during the war, what was happening, he had this reoccurring dream every night. And so he said he was in a great battlefield. I saw our men being mowed down by the sickles of death. I saw thousands march to the aid of our armies. They were the dead. Without the dead, we were helpless. So I've tried to show this in the monument to Canada's fallen. That was his main reason why he developed it the way he did. Next. A lot of concrete and rebar. This gives basically the numbers, the cost, and how long it took. Next. It was unveiled in July 26, 1936 by King Edward VIII, one of the few official functions as king that he did. Right, so we're quite honored by that. There was in the neighborhood of 100,000 people were at this unveiling in 1936. Next. And this is Mrs. Wood, who is being greeted by the king. She was the Silver Cross Mother. Next. And which is here, and I do have, this one is a picture of the one that I have in my little display case, which was awarded to the family of a corporal who was killed on the 10th of April at Vimy Ridge. Next. Now, if anyone gets to go to Vimy, this is just sort of the general layout. Entrance in through here. That was where I'm assuming the new building is probably in the same location where the old one was. There's a series of trenches and tunnels here. The main memorial here. This is where the French Moroccan Division memorial is. And then there's 2 cemeteries in this area here, including one from Penticton is buried there. Okay, next slide. Okay, the actual monument. And it's just a plan to show, okay, here's the tomb. You approach from this side here. And this is the back side of the memorial. And as you can see, all the names go around. So if you're trying to find a relative, you can go hopefully to the panel to sort out where you can find them and then start searching. They were listed they were listed by rank and alphabet. So they start with the officers and then it'll go down the line. I had 102 members of the 2nd Canadian Mounted Rifles whose names are on this memorial. And when I approached it, I went, how am I going to find them all? So I took the easy route out, as I photographed all of them. And that panel over there is one of the panels, right there. I figured it was easier than I can sit home on a computer and I could find out where everybody's name is. Next. So this is the monument as you approach it with the 2 pylons and coming up to the steps. So it expresses our obligation to the dead and the grief of the living. And these are the kind of sentiments that we didn't see in normal war memorials. Normally they are of historic battles and sowing soldiers and artillery pieces and horses charging and so on. No, this is to the dead and to the grief of the living. Next. So this is Mother Canada. She presides over the tomb, which is sort of she's looking down at. This was carved from a single 30 metric ton block of limestone. All the limestone for the memorial came from a old 2nd century Roman quarry, which is located just outside of Sarajevo. So it's rather interesting. Elwood took a lot of time trying. He explored a lot of the various monuments that were in Europe at the time that were very old, because he wanted the limestone that was going to last for a long time. And so he did his homework before he went and chose this particular site for all the limestone that goes on to the memorial. And here she is. If you stand at the very base of the monument and look up, that's what you see. Next. And this is what she is looking at. The sarcophagus, stone sarcophagus at the very bottom. And note that we have the helmet, the sword, and the laurel leaf. Those designs were later on incorporated into Canada's Fallen Soldier Memorial that's in Ottawa. So it was borrowed from Elwood's design. Next. Again. So when you're standing there like this to the memorial, on this one side you have the breaking of the sword. So again, no war. We have to remember that that was the big battle cry. It was the war to end all wars. And so this was to represent that they're breaking the swords. Next. And then the other one is the memorial, the sympathy of Canadians for the helpless. In other words, Canada coming and helping those who aren't able to help themselves. Next. Okay, on the top of the pylons, there's a number of figures. So the very uppermost one is peace, honor, and charity. There's a lot of Christian underlying themes on the memorial. The Mother of Canada representing the Virgin Mother of Christianity. Various symbols here. Again, we have justice at the top, followed by faith and hope. All sort of typical Canadian Christian values. Next. Oh, yeah. And there's 2 crests up there, sorry, that represent Canada. So this is on the very front of the pylons. And then at the very base, we have these 2 figures. Next. So you have the torchbearer and the spirit of sacrifice. And if you notice, the pose of the spirit of sacrifice is similar to Christ on the cross. So there's a lot of religious underpinning tones at that time. But then that represents what society was back in the 20s when this was designed. So basically, the torchbearer is throwing that torch, he's holding it high to his comrades. In other words, that's us, to remember the fallen and not to forget. We need to keep alive the sacrifice of those soldiers. Next. So now on the reverse side, so the side that of the pylons that you come approaching, again you'll see the uppermost, you'll see the peace and justice on the top. And as you come down, you have knowledge, truth, Great Britain crest here, and France. Because that was the thing. So Canada's shield's on the front side, and on the back we have Britain and France. Next. So as you walk up the stairs, there's 2 more figures, the mourning woman and the mourning man, representing the husbands, the wives, and mothers, etc., who've lost the fallen. And if you notice here, the male has his hands sort of clenched in rage. And then here you can see the names on the cenotaph, or along the memorial. These are patterned after some Michelangelo's carvings that he did for us, a tomb that's in Italy, the concept of having these figures. Next. These are the names of the 6 people from Summerland who have no known grave and whose name is on the memorial. And then this is where it's the final, when you finally go all the way around, you get to the Z, there's a few more names that were missed or added on there. And then you have this panel that indicates the 11,285 names that are on here. And there's and this only represents the fallen who fought in France. Those who died and fought in Belgium and have no known grave, their names are inscribed at the Dominion Gate in Ypres. And there's approximately another 6,000 names there. Next. Okay, this is in one of the cemeteries not far from Vimy Ridge. And this is where they, under great secrecy and everything else, and a lot of research, chose an unknown Canadian soldier. They had to make sure it had no affiliation to a regiment or anything else. And that's his former location. He now, of course, resides in Ottawa, and it's the unknown soldier. Next. Now, there were a lot of people, and just because their name isn't on the memorial doesn't mean they don't have a grave. It means that some don't, but some just are unknown. They find a soldier, there's no way of identifying them. And so when you go through the cemeteries, like this one here says, a soldier of the Great War, a Canadian regiment. That's it. So he could be any of the ones that are missing from a Canadian regiment. Next. Then it could just be, they might know the rank, in this case, a Sergeant Major of a Canadian regiment. Then you have other ones who, in this case, it says 2nd Canadian Mounted Rifles, the 9th of April. So we now know that this person died on that particular day, but we don't know who. The 2nd CMR have, I believe it's about 16 soldiers that died on that day who have no known grave. One of those could be this individual. Next. And in other cases, why there's so many unknown soldiers is they'd get buried in a cemetery, and then an artillery barrage would come through and wipe it all out. And hence, that's why you come across this one. This is for the British, though. Say they knew at the time they were buried here, but now we don't know because the artillery came and churned everything up, and there's no way of knowing. And then the other solution thing was this particular one is Maple Grove, and every headstone says known to be buried in this cemetery. So again, the same sort of thing, where the headstone is, may not be a soldier actually at that point in time. It's just that within the walls of this cemetery, they knew they had these people buried, but they don't know exactly where. So they put it this way. So in a way, they have a headstone because they are buried there. Next. Now the trenches. There's a series of trenches that you'll see that were preserved by the workers. Actually, because it was taking a long time to get a lot of the limestone in, and the workers are sort of standing around, one of the creative foremen, who was also a veteran of the war, realized that these were starting to deteriorate, and he decided, make work project, let's restore the trenches. So they did with concrete bags and so on. And next. So they have done that throughout the whole thing. Now, one of the things is this picture here, this is a German gun emplacement in their listening post. And this flag here is that flag there. You can see how close the trenches are. They're not very much between our listening trenches and their listening trenches was easily within grenade distance. So they were very, very close. And then this here, in some cases, you see these black posts and there's some wire running between them. And in some cases, you'll see sheep walking out in the fields, and they have all these wired areas to stay out of. The reason is these things. They can still be found. These ones weren't actually at Vimy. I found these at another cemetery I was at. As I came back to my car, these were by the side of the road. And I looked, and the farmer's field had just recently plowed it. And so he had probably taken these and piled them up. So we have 5 shells here. And these are 18-pound rounds, which was one of the most common rounds that was fired. Each gun had 16,000 rounds during the battle, and multiplied by how many guns. You know, a lot of artillery went out, and not all of it went bang, because sometimes it'd go into the soft mud and just bury itself and wouldn't have the impact. And then this one here is a rather large one, and either from a a naval gun or perhaps a gas cylinder. Don't know. I wasn't touching it. I just walked away. Took a picture, walked away. Because we don't know, because the explosive could still go off. Not going to take no chances. Next. So the tunnels, you go down, and this is with a guy, so when you go there, you meet up with them, and then they take you in a group because they don't want to lose anybody down in the trenches or down through the tunnels. So they go in, they give everybody a number. So when you go in, so when you come out, you turn them back in. They have to have the same numbers that they went in. Okay, so you go down, and as you can see, it's not the best of places. It's very cramped. There was some living quarters in the base, and another trench, but as you can see, there's a big hole here, so that's why they don't let people just go wandering around through the area. Next. So another shot of Vimy, and again, here's where you can see the posts indicating where to keep out and how rough this ground is. There's a lot of areas around Vimy, the same with Beaumont Hamel, where there's still a lot of unexploded devices. And I think it's still in Vimy, there's still one. They used to tunnel underneath the German lines and plant a lot of explosives, so on the day of the battle it would go kaboom and destroy the German trenches, and then the Canadians would come out of the hole and raid onto them. And I believe this one may still be there that they haven't recovered. And there's a lot of explosives in this thing. So again, that's why they don't want people wandering outside, even though there are some silly people who will do that anyways, looking for a souvenir. Yeah, well, okay. Now, one of the big myths about Vimy is that it's on Canadian territory. It's like it's part of Canada. No, it's not. It's still part of France. What happened was France gave the land over to Canada to use forever, as long as they maintained the memorial on the site. So it's still under French law, patrolled by the French police. It's not a piece of sanctuary where I can go running there and say, oh, I'm here in Canada, I'm safe now. No, it doesn't work that way. Even the locals think some of that. The people we stayed with in Vimy thought it was part of Canada. But it's, hate to break the bubble, but it's not. Next. So, speaking of restoration, next. They started in 2004. They noticed that there was a lot of structural issues happening. So they did a quick restoration over a number of years. Next. At a cost, basically the same cost it cost to build the memorial in the first place. So of course in more updated dollars, so it was not an easy repair. And then again, next. And then Queen Elizabeth opened it on basically 10 years ago on the 9th.
We were there.
Oh, awesome, excellent. Were a lot of people there?
Yes.
A big crowd?
Big, huge. The King of Belgium was there as well, and his wife. And there was another ceremony at Eve's.
Yeah. Yeah, because each, yeah.
Passchendaele, the Queen was there.
Oh, okay, awesome. Yeah, excellent. So the few memories are coming back here.
We were there. Is it the Commonwealth that maintains?
Yeah, the Commonwealth War Graves.
Same as the graveyards then?
That's correct. Oh no, this is actually maintained by Canada.
Oh, Canada. Okay.
Yeah, because it's a Canadian memorial. It's part of our national parks.
Okay.
One of the few that we have outside of Canada. So it's maintained by Canada. The graves, all the graves, both in and around the thing, is all the Commonwealth War graves. And they do an awesome job.
They do.
I visited about 90 of them in my travels there. And
We visited where they did the tombstones.
yes. Yeah.
Replaced them.
Yeah, you saw the guys carving them? Yes.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things. A lot of the headstones are starting to deteriorate because they were just like concrete, pressed concrete sort of thing. And then now replace it with a beautiful stone material. And they're in the process of trying to replace all of them. And they're doing a really nice job. And some they replace it outright with a new stone. In other cases, they have a guy there with a little drill, and he's etching it back in there and deeper. And they're doing a really amazing job.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, next. Okay, so another main memorial is the French National Cemetery, where there are, I don't know, 150,000 or whatever. There's a whole lot of unknown through, because this is an area where the Germans came forward and the French pushed them back and back and forth. So this is one of their things. This is their lantern tower. At night, there's a big light there that goes around and shines through the area. And this is not far from Vimy. It's just basically around the corner. And most of the people, from my understanding, who are going on this recent trip, which left today, I believe, will probably be going to the French National Memorial. So we have this. And then inside at the very top, I think there's 200 and some steps to go up to, is this section here, which is, other than the French First World War unknown soldiers buried at the Arc de Triomphe, all the remainder are in here. So Second World War, Indochina, Algeria, and this little container here contains the ash and soil from the various concentration camps of Second World War, are all preserved here. Next. The other thing, right across the parking lot from the French National Memorial is this Ring of Remembrance, which was dedicated just a few years ago. And all these panels that are there have the names of all the fallen from the northern part of France, whether they be British, Canadian, Australian, German. Next. And this is just one section of it. There's like close to 600,000 names on this. And they're all listed just alphabetically, starting at one panel all the way to Z. No distinction for rank, no distinction as to what country they come from, or where, whatever. They're just all listed. And in some cases, which is kind of nice to see, if they know their names, they put them on there, not just initials. So it's easy to find a relative or whatever that may have died.
So would it be a duplicate of the names that are out here?
Yes,
Okay.
it's a duplicate of basically all the soldiers, whether known and unknown. This is all the soldiers who died in the sort of the Calais region are on this, regardless of which side they were on, and whether they have a headstone or not. They're just all listed here, whether they have a known grave or not. If they died during the war, their name will be here. Okay. Next. And then this is a church that's down in the lee of this area of the ridge, which, as you can see, it's all bombed and in not great shape. The Canadian soldiers during the First World War set up, because this is now sort of in the rear area, from down back from the trenches, used to come in here and they wrote their names on the inside of the memorial here, or on the walls of the church. And they set up a small chapel for the locals, so they have their church services. And then after the war, it was supposed to be rebuilt by France, and they never did. And the excuse said, well, we're leaving it there as a monument to show how bad the Germans were by destroying this church. And then the locals reminded them that at the time, this church was in German territory, because they had actually advanced through and pushed the French past this point. And then they came back in May of 15 and pushed them back towards the ridge. It was the French artillery that destroyed it, because the Germans are using the tower of it, the steeple, to direct their guns. So actually it was destroyed by the French. And so they never did get their new church. Next. And then this is just a picture of the monument in the unknown soldier in Ottawa, just to show the similarity between the design of this and the one at the Vimy Memorial. And then some thoughts. This I obtained off a wall at a German cemetery in Normandy. So it's in all three languages. You can pick which one you like. Next. And I'm going to show you just two cemeteries. This is Ypres. This was a hospital cemetery. So when people came in wounded and then died, they were put in here. So as you see, almost 11,000 identified people and only 35 unknown. Because basically when they came in, they knew who they were for the most part. Next slide. This is Tycho, one of the other big Commonwealth British/Canadian cemeteries. In this case, we have the actual opposite. Approximately 3,500 known and 8,000 unknown. What they did was, a lot of times after the war, the soldiers were initially buried near the battle, because that's what the British were doing. And then they consolidated the cemeteries into big ones. And that's why a lot of times they may have been known who they were when it was buried, but by the time they come back to re-intern them, they didn't necessarily have the information, which is another reason why you have a lot of unknown soldiers. And that's it. Thank you.